what I want to do is have a mutual brain-picking session, and I'm going to start the ball rolling by saying why I, as a philosopher, am interested in many things that you are all probably interested in professionally. Basically, what we're going to talk about, I suppose, is the problem of control, as exemplified in the ancient Latin question, quis custodies ipsos? Who guards the guards? Now, we know that we're living in an age when there's been an enormous proliferation of techniques for subjecting every kind of natural process outside the human skin, and now increasingly inside the human skin, to some form of rational control. And as we succeed in doing this, it also becomes apparent that we're failing, that the process becomes of such a high degree of complexity that we begin to feel that we're standing in our own way, that everybody complains the state of affairs in the modern world, in the technological world, is so complicated that nobody can understand it. Nobody really knows what to do. That, for example, you want to run a small business, and you find you run into such enormous legal hassles that you need so many secretaries to do the paperwork that you can hardly do the business, that you're trying to run a hospital, but that you have to spend so much time making records and writing things down on paper that you don't have much time to practice medicine, that you're trying to run a university, and the requirements, the recording, the endless red tape of the registrar's office and the administration building is such that the actual work of research and teaching is seriously hampered. And so the individual increasingly feels himself obstructed by his own cautiousness. This is basically what it is. Now, to explain myself, first of all, because most of you are strangers to me, I am a philosopher who has for many years been interested in the mutual fructification of Eastern cultures and Western cultures, studying Oriental ideas, not in the spirit of saying to the West, you ought to be converted to Oriental ideas, but in the spirit of saying, you don't understand the basic assumptions of your own culture if your own culture is the only culture you know. Everybody operates on certain basic assumptions, but very few people know what they are. You can say, very often encounter the sort of character who's an American businessman, and he says, well, I'm a practical businessman. I believe in getting results and things done. All this thinking and highfalutin logic and nonsense is of no concern to me. Now, I know that the practical basic assumptions, the metaphysics of that man, can be defined as pragmatism, as a school of philosophy. But it's bad pragmatism because he's never thought it through. And so it's very difficult, you see, to get down to what are your basic assumptions. What do you mean by the good life? What do you mean by consistency? What do you mean by rationality? The only way of finding out what you mean by these things is by contrasting the way you look at something by the way it's looked at in another culture. And therefore we have to find cultures which are in some ways as sophisticated as our own, but as different from our own as possible. And of course for this purpose I always thought that the Chinese were optimal, and the Indians, the East Indians. And that by studying the ideas of these people, by studying their life goals, we could become more aware of our own. It's the old principle of triangulation. You don't establish the situation of a particular object unless you observe it from two different points of view and thereby calculate its actual distance from you. So by looking at what we are pleased to call reality, the physical world, from the basic standpoints of different cultures, I think we're in a better position to know where we are than if we only have one single line of sight. And therefore this has been my interest and my background. And arising out of this, there has come a further question, which I would call the problems of human ecology. How is man to be best related to his environment, especially in circumstances where we are in possession of an extremely powerful technology and have therefore the capacity to change our environment far more than anyone else has ever been able to do so? Are we going to end up not by civilizing the world, but by Los Angelizing it? In other words, are we going to foul our own nest as a result of technology? But all this gets down to the basic question is, really, what are you going to do if you're God? If, in other words, you find yourself in charge of the world through technological powers, and instead of leaving evolution to what we used to call in the 19th century the blind processes of nature, that was begging the question to call them blind. But at any rate, we say we're not going to leave evolution anymore to the blind forces of nature, but now we're going to direct it ourselves, because we are increasingly developing, say, control over genetic systems, control over the nervous system, control over all kinds of systems. Then simply, what do you want to do with it? But most people don't know what they want, and have never even seriously confronted the question of what they want. You ask a group of students to sit down and write a solid paper of 20 pages on what is your idea of heaven. What would you really like to happen if you could make it happen? And that's the first thing that starts people really thinking, because you soon realize that a lot of the things you think you would want are not things you want at all. Supposing, just for the sake of illustration, you had the power to dream every night any dream you wanted to dream. And you could, of course, arrange for one night of dreams to be 75 years of subjective time, or any number of years of subjective time. What would you do? Well, of course, you'd start out by fulfilling every wish. You would have routs and orgies and all the most magnificent food and sexual partners and everything you could possibly imagine in that direction. When you got tired of that, after several nights, you would switch a bit and you would soon find yourself involved in adventures and contemplating great works of art, fantastic mathematical conceptions. You would soon be rescuing princesses from dragons and all sorts of things like that. And then one night you'd say, now look, tonight what we're going to do is we're going to forget this dream as a dream. And we're going to be really shocked. And when you woke up from that one, you'd say, ooh, wasn't that an adventure? Then you would think more and more far out ways to get involved and let go of control, knowing that you'd always come back to center in the end. But while you were involved in the dream, you wouldn't know you were going to come back to center, be in control. And so eventually you would be dreaming a dream in which you found yourselves all sitting around in this room, listening to me talking, all involved with the particular life problems which you have.